Welcome to the Sherpa Chalet on Mount Podcastia, where it's time for podcast picks with Jim the Podcast Sherpa. You'll get to hear about podcast recommendations for your podcast playlist, along with occasional interviews with other podcasters and video hosts. Now waiting for you is your host, Jim the Podcast Sherpa. He's just like you imagined. But don't worry. We'll make it up to you somehow.
This week on Podcast Picks with Jim the Podcast Sherpa, meet podcast host and producer Cready, who hosts I Made a Podcast. Oddly enough, that was going to be the title of this podcast, but the Ripleys, believe it or not, people were threatening us with litigation. Something about having proof of talent.
Welcome to the Sherpa's Podcast Picks. It's the podcast about, podcasts. And now, coming to you from Mount Podcastia, here's your host who wonders what's on your podcast playlist, Jim the Podcast Sherpa.
Hello there, Rebels of the Sherpa-lution, and welcome to Podcast Picks with Jim the Podcast Sherpa. That's my name, coming to you from Sherpa-lu Studios here in the Sherpa Chalet, high atop Mount Podcastia, where I overlook the millions and millions of podcasts that are out there. Welcome to another episode, and we're talking podcasts this week, and what a perfect choice for a guest this week. I actually met this week's guest through another podcaster who is yet to be on the show, but I'm still working on it. Hopefully one of these days our schedules will sync and that other podcaster will be on. You're in for a treat with this one. His name is Cready. He hosts the podcast I Made a Podcast, and he also hosts a religious podcast as well. And I also had the pleasure of being on his show where we did discuss all things podcasting. That was really a lot of fun, and we really clicked and had a lot of laughs too. It was interesting, especially if you check out the interview on his show. We really got into a really cool discussion about AI and its place in the podcasting world. But we had him over here and we talked about all sorts of stuff and about creating podcasts. And I'm sure you're probably wondering, why are you having someone on here who talks about creating podcasts? Well, I figure for everybody who listens, there's always somebody who has that in their brain to say, you know what, maybe I'd like to make a podcast. I mean, if I'm one of the two that are listening, we've already got it 50% covered, right? This is for some of you who might want to create a podcast. We don't get too heavily into the podcasting discussion. We just really get to know Chris and talk about his show. And it's very educational, not too long, not too dry. You'll really learn a lot listening to him. He is also a podcast producer. He has a very fascinating story about how he got wrapped up into this podcasting world. And you will hear it in the interview, which is coming right up. So let's listen to Cready, the host of I Made a Podcast. Hello there, Rebels. We are here in the podcasting room of the Sherpa Chalet. We come here every once in a while. My guest is a guy who I just was on his show, and his name is Creary, and he has a self-fulfilling prophecy title of all podcasts called I Made a Podcast. And he's coming to us from Toronto. See, if he didn't make a podcast, we wouldn't be having this conversation, but he did. So he's here. Chris, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jim, what's going on? How are you?
I'm doing very well. And it seems like a minute since I've seen you.
Yeah, literally.
So we decided this is one of these cross promo things, guys, and they're nice and easy. So we want to get to know you a little bit, Chris. So what got you into this whole journey? Now, you started roughly around the same time that I did.
Yeah, so I'll give you the full story.
Sure.
Because one thing builds on the next.
Okay.
And you'll see how it lines up perfectly to where I am right now. Okay, so back in further back in 2005, I started to sing at my church. And I wasn't really that good. And I decided, what can I do to get better? So I bought a little keyboard. And when we had choir practice at church, I would go home and, kind of hit the notes on the keyboard to make sure that I was singing the right notes on key, right? In the right pitch, right? That's how I was. Yeah, absolutely, right? Because you don't want to be the one person singing that's completely off, right? So I would do that to practice. And as I did that, I got a little better at playing the piano. So I was just like, oh, this is nice. Learned how to play the piano. Someone saw this gift and they gifted me a guitar, like an electric guitar. And I was just like, wow, this is nice. And I learned how to play the guitar. And then from there, I started, listening to more music and stuff like that. And I actually learned, through listening to music, I learned how to produce music. So I started to write some songs and bought some equipment, an interface and a whole bunch of stuff for my computer so that I can learn how to record and produce music. And I was doing that for a good while. And all the while, I'm still singing in my church choir. And I was growing. And at this time, I was living on my own in my own condo. And I had a room which was my studio room, right? Where I had all of my equipment there. And on a monthly basis, all of the young men from my church would come together and we would have this session at my house where we would get mentored by like some of the older men, right? To teach us the ropes, right? Because all of us were single. We didn't really, know anything about our purpose, about anything about, from a spiritual perspective, how to be real men and, from a biblical perspective. So we would come together and learn from them at my condo. I was just hosting it. I wasn't leading the session. I was just hosting it.
Okay.
And we were in there just talking and having some great conversations, powerful conversations. And I was learning so much. And there was one Saturday evening, right? We had a session and everybody left. And I was cleaning up afterwards. And I said, man, I wish so-and-so was here to listen to this. And I wish this person would have, showed up to get it because they missed the session. And it's at that point, I felt God was saying to me, my eyes just looked in my studio room. And it's like God was saying, you have all the equipment over there to start a podcast. And I said, wow. I'm going to start a podcast, right? So I had all the equipment, the microphones, the interface, the computers. I just needed to do it, right? But, how, most people can resonate with this, when you say you're going to do something, Mr. Procrastination shows up, right? So that I lingered with that thought and that thought kept on coming back at me, start a podcast, start a podcast, start a podcast. And I didn't start a podcast until one day I said to myself, okay, you know what? I need to start this podcast. So I actually purchased some hosting, even though I didn't have a podcast. I purchased a hosting. One of my biggest pet peeves in life is wasting money. I don't like to spend money without getting some return back from what I'm spending, right? So okay. I purchased this hosting for my podcast that didn't exist yet. And the first month when I looked at my credit card statement, I saw that, I think it was like $25. I saw it coming out and I said, I don't want this to come out next month without a podcast being produced. So from that moment, I said, you know what, let's put the work in. And I did the work to start my first podcast, which I still have right now. It's called the Faith Fight Podcast or just Faith Fight Podcast. And basically it's a Christian faith-based podcast where I share what I learned and in order to, just like those conversations that I was having in my condo, sharing what I learned with other people so that we all can learn from a spiritual perspective and grow from there. And then from that podcast, I said to myself, man, I really like podcasts. And as I mentioned to you just a little while ago, one of my biggest pet peeves is audio. Poor audio quality is one of the things that I hated. And I said to myself, I want to start a new podcast and I want to interview people who respect good audio. Who can I interview? And immediately the thought came into my head, I should interview podcasters because for sure, podcasters will know how important good audio is. And I thought to myself, okay, what should I name it? And then the thought came to my head, I made a podcast. I was just like, okay, let's see if the domain is available. So I went and I looked, the domain was available. I bought it. And then that was it. I made a podcast. So my first podcast, Faith Fight Podcast, started 2018, I believe, or 2019, somewhere around there. And I made a podcast started January 2024. And if that wasn't enough, I said, man, I really like podcasting. So I started Podcast Production Labs, where I work as a podcast producer, right? And I'm in my studio right now where people come here and they record their podcast and I produce it for them. So it's like one thing back in 2005 when I started singing in my church choir, it just built on the next to the point where I am right now, where I have multiple podcasts for myself, where I'm producing other people's podcasts. And it's just, I feel so at much at peace and at ease when I can get behind the microphone and just have a conversation like this. I just love it so much. So that's pretty much how I got into podcasts. I know it was a long story. I tried to simplify it and make it short, but it's the best that I could do. I'm sorry. I'm a podcaster. I just like to talk. So
no, but you can see like the evolution, though.
Absolutely,
it really.
yeah.
I mean, not too many people get the divine intervention and the bill from the credit card company, but
work it together, right?
What's really interesting? I mean, and even for both of us, that there was really no school about podcasting or anything. We just kind of picked it up and ran with it.
Exactly. Yeah. So like for me, the learning of how to podcast, well, I learned a little bit through producing music, but I learned how to produce music on my own through YouTube, right? But then transitioning that to becoming a podcaster and a podcast producer, it was similar, but still there were certain things that I need to learn, like in terms of like microphone placement and stuff like that. And also having a studio like this, it's important to learn about like cameras for people who want to do video podcasts, and you need to know about cameras and lighting. But like you said, I'm sure there is classes in universities and colleges now, but back when I started, it was basically, trial and error, or go onto YouTube and see what other people are doing and see what you can learn that way, right? So that's pretty much how I learned how to do everything with regards to podcasting.
Yeah, I guess ultimately we do kind of stand on the shoulders of the people that came before us.
Absolutely.
When it comes to doing this.
Absolutely, yes.
Podcasting, I don't really call it a new media anymore because it's really been kind of reflected in society. And even like sometimes you'll hear those little snide jokes on TV. They're like, oh, how did you do that? Well, I listened to a podcast, or, and sometimes it's like, woo, or other times it's like, yeah, he's just being sarcastic. Where do you think that podcasting is going to go? Do you think that there's going to be more of an evolution?
Well, here's the thing, right? So right now when we're recording this, the end of March, 2026, the Golden Globes just happened in February, and they had their own category for podcasting.
That's right.
This was the first time I think that it was recognized in a national award show. So if you ask me where things are going, I feel like it's only going to we're still at the growth stage when it comes to podcasting.
Yes.
But as you can see, it's being more and more accepted now by the popular forms of media, right? So you see a lot of the network TV companies, who have shows, taking those shows and making them into podcasts now, right? Taking those same conversations like daytime television shows, they're turning them into podcasts right now, because the way that we are consuming information, it's no more, okay, I'm going to wait till 3:00 because that's when my show comes on TV. It's like on demand, right? We want to listen to it right now, or we want to listen to it on our way to work, or while we're working, or whatever the case may be. We want the ease and the ability to listen to it when we want it, on demand. And I feel like a podcast is still in the growth phase, where people are getting into it, and because they realize that they can listen to their favorite show on demand. And more the traditional media that's out there right now, a lot of them, if they haven't shifted already to put their shows onto on-demand platforms like podcasting, or like on YouTube, or on some of them are even going on Netflix, where people can get what they want when they want it.
Right.
Podcasting is at that same place where they can, when people want to get their show, they can get it on a podcast whenever they want it. So I feel like we're still at that growth phase where people are transitioning, media companies are transitioning, and there's a huge opportunity out there for podcasters right now. People who want to get behind the mic and share their message. There's a huge opportunity, because if you can carve out a niche for yourself, you can gain a large base of loyal listeners right now, as people are gravitating towards podcasters. So I feel like it's only going to continue to grow, right? And we're going to see more and more of mainstream media adopting podcasts and using that to get their message out now.
Yeah, and I think even the definition of what a podcast is also starting to change too, because one of the apps that I use when I like to check out podcasts is Spotify, and they have the videos, and some of them are just their animations
Yep.
or their little comedy skits. And it's like on a standard podcast, like a couple of years ago, this was unheard of. Now all of a sudden, yeah, this is like the direction that it's heading.
Absolutely. Yeah. And and that's one thing, right? We got to pay attention to what these big companies are doing. Like for the independent podcasters like me and you, right?
Mm-hmm.
The small, I want to say small guys, but
Yeah, no, that's fair.
not to minimize who we are, but compared to like
anyway.
compared to like mainstream media, right? We got to pay attention to where they are putting their money behind. And if you ever listen to like a company's like quarterly report or their annual report or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
see where they're putting their money, where they're putting their emphasis in the upcoming year, right? And if that isn't an area that you are in as podcasters, take note of that, right? And you put your emphasis behind that as well, right? Because if they see it and if they're willing to put millions of dollars behind, whatever brands like Spotify, marketing these shorter videos now, it's because they have done the research to see that, okay, there's something here. We need to continue to pursue this. Let's, move in that direction. And then we as podcasters need to be like, if they're doing it, let me figure out how I can get in on it and, get my podcast and my voice and my message out there so it can reach the people, who it's intended to reach.
Sure. Now, you said that you do podcast production and you're podcasting coach as well.
Mm-hmm.
So when people come to you, and like we were just talking about this in your show about the podcasting DOG, the delusions of grandeur, that, I'm going to have millions of people listen to me. What do you usually tell them?
I usually tell them, listen, just start and don't worry about the millions of people, right? This is the one thing that I wish podcasters, when they're just starting out, will just have in the middle of their heart. Okay. It's a one-liner. So if you clip up anything for short form media, this is the one thing that you clip up. Okay. So don't chase perfection, but chase progress.
Yeah.
Right. Because if you try to be perfect right when you start, if you think everything when you start is going to be like flawless, you're going to be very, very mistaken when you listen to your first episode. It's not going to be perfect. But here's the interesting thing that does happen. When you continue to show progress and show consistency, you will get better. You will reach your 20th episode and look back and listen to your first episode and you'll laugh because you'll be like, wow, I thought I did good on my first episode, but when I listen to my 20th episode compared to my first one, is night and day. And likewise, when you listen to your 50th or your 100th episode, right, you will look back at your first episode and be like, I don't even recognize that person anymore. You know what I mean? and the interesting thing about it, as you can stay consistent and continue to put content out there, whether it's weekly, daily, weekly, or bi-weekly or monthly, whatever the cadence is, you're creating a backlog, right? And when people find your podcast, whether it's at episode 20 or episode 50, and if they like what you have to say, they'll go back in and listen to your entire backlog because they like you. Right. But if you start with the mindset where I want my podcast to be perfect day one, and if it's not perfect in the first 3 episodes and you give up because it doesn't meet your level of perfection, you know what? The people who would have liked your podcast will never be able to find it because you gave up after 3 episodes. And even if they do find it after 3 episodes, they will only have those 3 episodes to listen to.
Yeah.
Right. So that's why you don't chase perfection. Chase the progress and continue to be consistent. And then everything else, you'll just continue to grow and everything else will happen and show up accordingly.
I was laughing to myself when you said 20 episodes, because I'll tell you a little story. My first episode, I interviewed a lady named Allison Sharp, and she had a podcast called Travel Snacks, and she traveled around the world and had a lot of great stories and everything like that. And after the interview, I say, look, this is my first episode and I hope to grow and to change. I literally addressed this on the show. And the funny thing was, I had her back on my 20th episode and I actually commented and said, I can see that things are already starting to change and I'm feeling more comfortable and getting towards what I want to do. So, I mean, I I'm living your words.
You proved it, right? So you can resonate with exactly what I said. And I think every podcaster who, fights that fight and stays consistent and resists the urge to give up after like 3 or 5 episodes, they look back and then they say, you know what? Yeah, I've grown so much in this area of podcasting because I didn't stop. Right. And that's the thing. Don't stop. You can maybe take a break if you need to recalibrate and readjust, your strategy or the things you do, but don't stop. Be consistent, continue to put out the content, and you will get better.
What do you think makes a good podcast?
Okay. What makes a good podcast? Number one, and I told you this before, good audio.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And actually, you know what? Let me rephrase that. Crystal clear audio. Right. So if you have crystal clear audio, I think people listening can overcome maybe bad video, right? Or bad lighting or whatever the case is. If you have good audio, people will still listen to you. So that's one thing that makes a good podcast. The second thing that makes a good podcast is someone with good energy or enthusiasm, right? If you, like we talked about, if you have a podcast and if you're, hi, I'm Chris. Welcome to I Made a Podcast. Today we're going to talk about podcasting and how it's so much fun. You turn off, you tune out, right? Because you don't want to endure someone's boring voice for 30 minutes to an hour, right? You want someone who sounds enthusiastic and passionate. And I don't mean, to be not to be authentic, but you want to be yourself. But if you're podcasting about something you're passionate about, something you love, it's gonna come across in your voice, right?
Yes.
So be your true self. And be, let your passion come through. And that's actually number 3 is the authenticity piece of it, right? You don't want to try to act like anybody else, like Joe Rogan, or, what's the other author from The American Life, whatever his name is, Gladwell, I think is his name. You don't want to act like Jim, the podcast Sherpa, or Chris Creary. You want to make sure that you are yourself, right? Because when you are yourself, first of all, you're not putting on a mask or a fake or a front that you have to remember every single time. That puts additional pressure on you to try to, perform, right? When you could just be you and just let you flow when you get behind the microphone, the thing that will happen is the right people who like your voice and like your message will love, and they'll be raving fans. They'll be listening. They'll be waiting every single time you are ready to drop a new episode. They'll look on their phone. Oh, I'm supposed to get a new upload from Chris today because it's Thursday. I Made a Podcast, comes out every Thursday. I'm waiting for it, but I don't see it. They'll be waiting for that download every single time when you release a new episode. So I want to say those 3 things. So your audio, your enthusiasm or passion for what you're talking about, and your authenticity, right? Regardless of whatever you're talking about, if you have those 3 things down, everything else could be whatever. The way that the technology that you have to record your podcast could be whatever. Where you record your podcast, it doesn't matter, right? I've actually recorded a podcast episode in my car before just to prove that I could do it, right? It doesn't matter. As long as the audio is clear, you have enthusiasm and passion for what you're talking about, and if you're your true authentic self when you are delivering your content. Those, I think, are the top 3 things that make a good podcast.
Yeah, it's funny. Well, I'm always checking out podcasts, going up and down the charts. And I laugh to myself when I'm driving because sometimes there's like a sleep podcast or yoga podcast. And I'm driving. I don't think this is going to work now.
But you see, here's the thing. So if you have a sleep podcast or, something about calming people down, right?
Yeah.
The authenticity comes out, right? So if that is the podcast, you're going to want to talk with a nice calming tone, right? And be nice and calm and mellow like this, because that's the point. That's the authenticity. And that will connect with the people that it's intended to, that want to listen to it. That's exactly what will connect with them, right? Oh, this is great. So anyways.
We were talking in our interview about that sometimes we come across people who shouldn't do podcasts. And when you say that, I was thinking you don't want to turn something like, hey, welcome to Relaxation for Beginners. Now pay attention.
Yeah, that actually does the opposite effect, right?
So what podcasts do you like to listen to?
Okay. So at first I didn't like to listen to my own voice. But now I do like to listen to my own podcast. So I made a podcast and Faith Fight podcast. I like to listen to it. It encourages me. Now on my outside of my own podcast, let's see. There's so much podcast that I like to listen to. Let me just look at my phone right now and see some of the recent ones. I like sports.
Okay.
So and this actually is related to something I mentioned earlier, right? Where the big networks are now creating podcasts. So one of the podcasts that I like to listen to is one of the sports debate podcasts. It's called First Take. That's one of the ones that I like to listen to because I like to hear different perspectives on sports topics. And sometimes I present my own argument, to myself in the car when I'm driving, like if I'm part of the show as well. There's another podcast it's called Social Proof with David Shands and Donnie Wiggins. They're based out of Atlanta. And the gist of that show is they interview people and they talk about business, entrepreneurship. And they, talk about people who are doing amazing things in their sphere and, kind of sharing the wisdom, sharing the insight with everybody else. And maybe one more that I like to listen to. Oh, there's lots. Okay, so here's another one. Okay. Pablo Torre Finds Out. So
Okay.
he's like a journalist, and his podcast is more so like on the investigation side of it. So he covers a variety of different topics, and it's related to sports in some way or somehow, but it's more so a deep investigative conversation that he has with himself and his co-host. And I like the way that they go into a specific topic and they do their investigations and they find out certain things about whatever topics and then they share it. So it's like it brings a lot of aha moments or brings some insight into, again, in the world of sports, because I'm a big sports guy. So I like to hear the behind the scenes, the things that you don't hear from like when you're just looking at the box score or just watching the highlights. The things behind the scenes in sports is one of the things that I love to, hear about and, understand a little bit more about what's going on with that. So those are 3 podcasts that I like to listen to.
On that point, do you watch football much?
Yes, I do. New York Giants is my team, by the way, and I
Okay.
know they're not doing good right now, but I have hope that next season, they will get out of the basement of the NFC East. Hopefully,
The reason why I brought that up, and you were saying that you're interested in like the behind the scenes. Did you ever hear the podcast by the Kelsey brothers, The New Heights?
New Heights. Yes, I have. Well, again, that's a popular podcast.
Yeah.
I haven't listened to that one though.
Yeah.
But it is something that I'm actually going to listen to soon. And I'll tell you the reason why. One of the things that I do on I Made a Podcast, and this is new for this season, is I do something called a podcast audit.
Okay.
Right. So I have a list of criteria for podcasts out there. And the goal of this audit is to review popular podcasts that are out there against this list of criteria and kind of pinpoint what they are doing well, what they're not doing well, areas for them to improve so that we can see what they're doing and maybe copy them, for lack of a better word, right?
Right.
See what we can apply into our own podcast and do what they're doing and also not make the mistakes that they might be doing with their podcast. So on my list of podcasts to do an audit on is New Heights podcast. That's one of them that's on the list. Again, sports, those, Kelsey brothers are like both NFL players, or one of them is an NFL player, one is a former NFL player. But it's something that's up my alley, so to speak, right?
I mean, I don't really follow football, but I checked out an episode of their show and I really enjoyed how they put so much background and perspective into the podcast. They weren't just doing the box scores. And I think like, well, if somebody wanted to get into football and they wanted a podcast to listen to, that would probably be the one I would recommend to them.
Yeah, nice. So was there, and sorry for turning the tables on you again.
That's okay.
But this is the interviewer in me coming out. So was there anything specific that they said, or maybe one example, and that you want to share from the New Heights podcast that actually caught your attention? Something that they said that was like, wow, this is interesting insight.
Well, yeah, because they both talked about their careers as college football players and how that affected them being in the pros. And, you wouldn't normally hear that in just a typical sports podcast, but,
Right.
they really make you feel, they both have very warm voices. So they kind of make you feel like, oh yeah, look at, what Travis and Jason are going through, and, look what they're, where they are now. And it's interesting. They're both at interesting positions in their lives and their careers, even though, like I said, Jason retired, to just have that interesting outlook on the sport.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I'm definitely, so like I said, I haven't listened to that podcast yet, but it's on my list to listen to, and I'm going to do an audit on it. So I'm going to share my findings on my podcast so that everyone can learn from what they're doing well and areas for improvement so that we can apply it into our own podcast.
Yeah. And when you do mine, I will be hiding under my desk the entire time.
You want me to? I can do it if you want.
You be my guest, my friend. Right. I'm always willing to hear what people think. I can take the good with the bad, and we all know what we like and what we don't like. So it's fair, we've survived this hour together, so I'm doing okay. At least I'm bearable for at least an hour. We have a portion of the show that is called Shameless Self-Promotion, and this is, Chris, where you can let everybody know where they can follow you, and if you're out there on the socials, what they need to do.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. So you can follow me. I have lots of social media platforms and lots of stuff that I'm doing. You can follow me on Podcast Production Labs on Instagram. You can follow I Made a Podcast on Instagram, or you can follow Faith Fight Podcast on Instagram. All three of those platforms are me, okay?
Okay.
And one of the things that I have recently done, because like I said, I coach a lot of podcasters and I help produce podcasts, I recently created a podcast readiness assessment. And I want to share it with your listeners, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
It's an online form. It's a questionnaire where if you ever thought about starting a podcast, you said, hey, maybe I have a great idea. I want to know if I can start a podcast. All you need to do is just fill out this form and just answer the questions. And then it will give you a response that tells you if you're ready or if you're not ready to start a podcast. And it will give you the suggestions to get ready, give you recommendations of what you need to do to get your idea from a place where maybe you might be like a F or a D- score to get it to an A+ score, right? So that's something that I want to share with everyone listening. If you ever thought about starting a podcast, I'll give you the link, and you can click on the link and you can try it out. And yeah.
We can do that. Okay. Mr. Chris Creary, he is the host once again of I Made a Podcast. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
This was a blast, Jim. We should do this again. This was a lot of fun.
Why not?
Yeah.
It looks like the Sherpa is no longer locked in the bathroom at the Sherpa Chalet, so we can finally get back to the show.
Thanks so much to Chris Creedy for coming on the show. Be sure to check out his podcast. If you're into wanting to make your own podcast, you will definitely learn a lot from him. And please check out the episode that we did together. Also, we had a lot of fun on this one. I think you will enjoy it. And like I said, a lot of really interesting topics were covered in that interview. And if I don't have the link to our interview in the show notes, I will provide it to you on our social media, which is Sherpa-lution on Instagram, Threads, and Sherpa-lution1 on TikTok. This coming Saturday, we've got Sherpa Selects coming up. That's where we do some of our favorite podcast episodes from like the first 9 years. I believe we are wrapping up season 6. I never get it right. I always see it. Is it 5, 6, 7? Anyway, it's all the good stuff. It's cleaned up so that you can really enjoy it a little bit more. And until then, I say to you, Rebels, viva la Sherpa-lution.
Thanks for listening to the Sherpa's Podcast Picks. The podcast is now over. Please disperse and tell everyone about us. As long as they don't put us back in jail. Viva la Sherpa-lution!